My sister created a GoFundMe claiming I was dying of cancer. I discovered this while standing in line at the grocery store, perfectly healthy, staring at my own face on a stranger's phone screen. The caption read, "Help save Vanessa, stage 4 lymphoma." I'm Vanessa Caldwell, and at 41 years old, I never imagined my own family would fake my death for profit. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from. And if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow, I've saved something extra special for you. The discovery happened on an ordinary Tuesday afternoon in March. I was buying ingredients for dinner, mentally calculating whether I had enough for both the chicken and the vegetables, when I heard a woman behind me talking to her friend. "It's so tragic," she was saying. "She's only in her 40s and they're saying she has maybe 6 months left. The family is trying to raise money for experimental treatments." Something about her tone made me glance back, and that's when I saw it. My face. My professional headshot from 3 years ago, the one I'd used for my real estate license, plastered across a fundraising page with a devastating headline. My hands started shaking so badly I dropped the tomatoes I'd been holding. They rolled across the floor, splitting open, red juice spreading like blood across the white tiles. The woman noticed and immediately reached down to help me, her face full of concern. "Oh honey, are you all right?" she asked, and I wanted to laugh at the absurdity. Was I all right? I was apparently dying of cancer I didn't have while my family collected donations from kind strangers like her. I left my cart right there in the middle of the produce section and walked out of the store. My car felt too small, too confining, as I sat in the parking lot pulling up the fundraiser on my own phone. $23,000. They had raised $23,000 in my name for a disease I didn't have. The page was elaborate, detailed, heartbreaking. It described my brave fight against an aggressive form of lymphoma, my positive attitude despite the devastating diagnosis, my determination to try experimental treatments that insurance wouldn't cover. There were updates posted regularly by my sister Monica, each one more emotional than the last, describing my good days and bad days, my hope and my fear, my unwavering faith that we'd beat this together. The comments section was full of prayers and encouragement from people I'd never met. "Stay strong, Vanessa. Praying for your healing. Your courage inspires me." Dozens of people had donated anywhere from $20 to $500, moved by the story of a young woman fighting for her life. Except I wasn't fighting for my life. I was fighting to understand how my own family could do this to me. I'd always been the responsible one, the one everyone leaned on when things got difficult. After our parents died in a car accident 7 years ago, I'd taken charge of everything. I'd organized the funeral, settled the estate, made sure Monica got her share of the inheritance even though she'd blown through it within 18 months on a failed boutique business and a boyfriend who disappeared the moment the money ran out. I'd co-signed on her apartment lease when her credit was too poor to qualify on her own. I'd loaned her money for rent at least a dozen times, money I never expected to see again. But this wasn't borrowing. This wasn't even stealing in the traditional sense. This was something far more sinister. This was erasing my identity, my health, my reality, and replacing it with a fictional narrative designed to extract sympathy and cash from innocent people. I sat in that parking lot for over an hour, reading every word of the fundraiser, every comment, every update. Monica had woven an intricate story, complete with doctor appointments I'd never attended, treatments I'd never received, side effects I'd never experienced. She'd even posted photos, carefully selected pictures of me looking tired or sad, moments captured at family dinners or holidays when I'd been stressed about work or upset about something minor. In the context of her fake cancer story, these normal human moments became evidence of my suffering. The most disturbing part was how many people in our extended family and social circle had shared the page. Cousins I barely spoke to, Monica's friends, even some of my old college acquaintances. Had they all known it was fake? Or had Monica convinced them too? I needed answers, but I also needed a plan. Barging into Monica's apartment and confronting her wouldn't accomplish anything except giving her time to craft another elaborate lie. Instead, I drove home and spent the evening documenting everything. I took screenshots of every page, every update, every comment. I printed out copies and saved digital backups in 3 different locations. Then I started making calls. The first was to my doctor's office. I explained the situation to the nurse, who was horrified and immediately agreed to provide a letter confirming I had no cancer diagnosis, had never been treated for lymphoma, and had no serious health conditions whatsoever. The second call was to a lawyer, an old friend from high school named Patricia Chun who specialized in fraud cases. She listened to my story with growing disbelief. "Vanessa, this is serious. This isn't just unethical, it's illegal. Charity fraud, identity theft, possibly wire fraud if any of the money crossed state lines through electronic donations." "I know," I said quietly, "but I need to understand why before I decide what to do about it. Monica is my only family left. I need to at least try to understand what would drive her to this." Patricia was quiet for a moment. "I understand, but be careful. People who are desperate enough to commit this kind of fraud are capable of escalating if they feel cornered. Promise me you won't confront her alone." I promised, though I wasn't entirely sure I'd keep that promise. That night I barely slept. Every time I closed my eyes I saw that fundraiser page, my face staring back at me from a fictional deathbed. I thought about all the times Monica had called me crying about money troubles, all the times I'd transferred funds into her account without question because she was my little sister and I loved her. Had she been planning this even then? Or had it been a spontaneous decision? A moment of desperation that snowballed into something monstrous? By morning I'd made a decision. I needed to see Monica face to face, to look into her eyes and understand how we'd arrived at this point. But I wouldn't go alone. I called my best friend Lauren, a no-nonsense accountant who'd known me since college and had never particularly liked Monica. "I always knew there was something off about her," Lauren said when I explained the situation. "The way she always had some crisis that required your money, your time, your energy. But this is sociopathic." We agreed to meet at a coffee shop near Monica's apartment. Lauren would wait outside while I went in, ready to intervene if things went badly. Monica lived in a trendy neighborhood in Portland, in a renovated loft that was far beyond what her sporadic income from freelance graphic design should have been able to afford. I'd always assumed she was barely scraping by, that the nice apartment was a holdover from better financial times that she couldn't bear to give up. Now I wondered if my fake cancer had been funding her lifestyle. She answered the door in expensive yoga clothes, her highlighted hair perfect, her nails freshly manicured. She looked healthy, happy, prosperous. Nothing like someone whose sister was supposedly dying. "Vanessa!" she exclaimed, pulling me into a hug that felt like a betrayal. "What a surprise. Come in, come in." I was just about to make some tea. I followed her inside, taking in the details I'd missed on previous visits. The new furniture, the expensive espresso machine, the designer handbag casually tossed on the counter. "How have you been?" she asked brightly, filling a kettle with water. "You look tired. Are you feeling okay?" The irony of that question nearly made me laugh out loud. "Actually, Monica, I've been meaning to talk to you about something. I discovered something strange yesterday at the grocery store." I watched her carefully, looking for any sign of recognition, of guilt, of fear. There was nothing. Her expression remained open and curious. "Oh? What was that?" I pulled out my phone and opened the GoFundMe page, turning it to face her. "This." The color drained from her face, but only for a second. Then to my amazement, her eyes filled with tears. "Oh God, Vanessa, I can explain. I wanted to tell you, but I didn't know how." She sat down at her kitchen table, her hands shaking as she pressed them to her face. "I was going to surprise you with the money. I know you've been stressed about finances, about the business not doing well, and I thought if I could raise enough money, I could help you the way you've always helped me." I stared at her, genuinely stunned by the audacity of the lie. "Monica, I don't have cancer." "I know that," she said quickly. "I mean, I know you're not actually sick. But I thought if people believed you were, they'd donate, and then I could give you the money and tell them there was a miracle recovery or something. I was trying to help you. You raised $23,000 claiming I was dying, and you expect me to believe you were doing it to help me?" My voice was dangerously quiet. "Where's the money, Monica?" She looked away. "I used some of it to pay bills. I was going to pay it back before giving it to you. I just needed to get caught up on a few things first." "What things?" "Your rent that I'm co-signed on? The credit cards you maxed out? Or maybe the new furniture and designer clothes I'm seeing all over this apartment." Her tears stopped abruptly, her expression hardening. You've always looked down on me, haven't you? Perfect Vanessa with her successful real estate career and her paid-off condo. You have no idea what it's like to struggle, to have nothing while your sister has everything. I worked for everything I have, Monica. I worked 60-hour weeks while you were partying in college. I saved and budgeted while you spent money like water. And when you needed help, I gave it to you. Every single time. You gave me scraps, she spat. You gave me just enough to keep me dependent, to keep me coming back to you. You loved having me need you because it made you feel superior. The accusation was so unexpected, so completely contrary to how I'd viewed our relationship, that I couldn't immediately respond. That's not true, I finally said. I helped you because I love you. Because you're my sister. If you loved me, you would have given me my fair share of mom and dad's estate instead of keeping most of it for yourself.
Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel, it means a lot to us. Now back to the story.
We split everything 50-50, Monica. I have the paperwork to prove it. You got the house, she said. A house worth 3 times what I got in cash. You kept all the valuable items and gave me the leftovers. You didn't want the house. You said maintaining it would be too much trouble. You asked for cash instead so you could start your business. I bought out your share at market value, which you agreed to. And the valuable items you're talking about were family heirlooms I offered to let you have. You said you didn't want them. She stood up, her face flushed with anger. You've always rewritten history to make yourself look better. Poor Vanessa, sacrificing everything for her ungrateful sister. Well, I'm done being your charity case. I earned that money by telling a story people wanted to hear. You earned it by lying, by committing fraud, by using my identity and my face to scam kind people out of their money. I stood too, matching her energy. I have documentation of everything, Monica. Screenshots, records, a letter from my doctor confirming I have no cancer diagnosis. I've consulted with a lawyer. What you did is illegal on multiple levels. Fear flickered across her face. You wouldn't turn in your own sister. You exploited my identity to steal from innocent people. At this point, I'm not sure what you are to me. I headed toward the door, then turned back. You have 48 hours to shut down that fundraiser, return every penny to the donors, and post a full confession and apology. If you don't, I'm going to the police and pursuing legal action. With what money? She sneered. You can't afford a lengthy legal battle any more than I can. Patricia Chun is handling my case pro bono. She's fascinated by the legal implications and thinks it'll make an excellent case study. So yes, Monica, I absolutely can afford it. I left her apartment and found Lauren waiting in her car down the street. How did it go? She asked as I slid into the passenger seat. About as badly as possible. She actually tried to claim she was doing it to help me, then pivoted to saying I deserved it because I supposedly cheated her out of inheritance money. What are you going to do? I pulled out my phone and looked at the fundraiser page again. It was still active, still collecting donations from people who had no idea they were being scammed. I'm going to give her the 48 hours I promised. And then I'm going to make sure everyone knows the truth. Lauren drove me home, staying long enough to make sure I was okay before heading back to her own family. I spent the evening refreshing the GoFundMe page obsessively, watching the donation total climb higher. 23,000 became 23,500. Then 24,000. Every new donation felt like a weight on my chest. The next morning, I woke up to 17 missed calls and 32 text messages. They were all from relatives, friends of Monica, people I barely knew. The messages ranged from concerned to accusatory. How could you threaten your sister when she was just trying to help you? Monica told us what you said. You should be ashamed. Family is supposed to stick together, especially during hard times. Monica had gotten ahead of the story, spinning a new narrative where I was the villain. According to her version, she'd started the fundraiser with my knowledge and consent, and now I was trying to extort her for the money. I called Patricia immediately. She's escalating, I told her. She's telling people I knew about the fundraiser and approved it. Do you have any written communication with her about it? Texts, emails, anything? Nothing. Because I didn't know it existed until yesterday. Patricia was quiet for a moment. All right, here's what we're going to do. We're going to get ahead of this before it spirals further out of control. I'm going to draft a statement that we'll send to everyone who shared the original fundraiser. It'll include your doctor's letter, the timeline of when you discovered the fraud, and a clear explanation of what really happened. We'll also contact GoFundMe directly to report the fraud. Will they shut it down? They should, once they see the documentation. But Vanessa, you need to prepare yourself for the possibility that not everyone will believe you. Monica has had time to build her narrative. Some people will choose to believe her version because it's easier, or because they like her better. I know, I said quietly. But I can't let her keep scamming people. It's not right. Over the next 24 hours, Patricia and I worked on building an airtight case. We compiled every piece of evidence, created a detailed timeline, and prepared statements from my doctor, my employer confirming my work attendance during times Monica claimed I was undergoing treatment, even records from my health insurance showing no claims for cancer treatment or related care. When the 48 hours I'd given Monica expired with no action on her part, we sent our package to GoFundMe, filed a police report for fraud, and released a public statement. The response was immediate and explosive. Some people were horrified and apologetic, reaching out to express their shock that they'd been deceived. Others were defensive, insisting there must be some misunderstanding, that Monica wouldn't do such a thing. A few were openly hostile, accusing me of lying about my own health to hurt my sister. The local news picked up the story, running a segment about charity fraud that featured my case. Sitting in a news studio under bright lights, answering a reporter's questions about how it felt to discover my family had exploited my identity, was surreal and humiliating. Miss Caldwell, what do you want people to take away from your experience? The reporter asked near the end of the interview. I thought about that question carefully. I want people to know that it's okay to verify fundraisers before donating. It's not cynical or unkind to ask questions, to look for verification, to be careful with your generosity. And I want people who are struggling financially to know that there are legitimate resources available. Fraud like this makes it harder for people with real needs to get help. GoFundMe shut down Monica's page within 72 hours of receiving our documentation. They began the process of refunding donors, which would take weeks to complete. Monica hired a lawyer, some overpriced defense attorney who immediately started posting on social media about how I was persecuting my grieving sister. Apparently, I was now the villain in a story about how Monica's mental health struggles and unresolved trauma from our parents' death had led her to make a terrible mistake that she deeply regretted. I was exhausted by all of it. The legal proceedings, the public attention, the way every relationship I had seemed to require me to explain and justify and defend myself. I stopped answering my phone unless it was Patricia or Lauren. I stopped checking social media entirely. I focused on my work, on my clients, on the simple tasks of everyday life that had become unexpectedly comforting in their normalcy. 2 weeks after the story broke, I was showing a house to a potential buyer when I got a call from an unknown number. I almost didn't answer, but something made me excuse myself and take it. Vanessa Caldwell? The voice was male, unfamiliar, with a slight accent I couldn't quite place. Yes, who is this? My name is Marcus Okonkwo. You don't know me, but I know you. Or rather, I knew you. A long time ago. I tried to place the name and came up empty. I'm sorry, I don't remember meeting anyone named Marcus. We didn't exactly meet in the traditional sense. I was one of your clients, though you might not remember the transaction. You sold a house to my aunt about 15 years ago, when you were just starting out in real estate. 15 years ago I'd been 26, newly licensed, working frantically to build my business while trying to help Monica through college. I'd sold dozens of houses that year, most of them blur of showings and negotiations and paperwork. I'm sorry, I don't specifically remember that sale. But what can I do for you now? I saw your story on the news, the situation with your sister and the fraudulent fundraiser. And I wanted to reach out because what you're going through reminded me of my own family situation. I thought perhaps we could talk. There was something in his voice, a quality of genuine understanding rather than idle curiosity, that made me agree to meet him for coffee. We chose a neutral location, a busy cafe in downtown Portland where the noise of espresso machines and chattering customers would provide a buffer against the intensity of whatever conversation we were about to have. I arrived early, ordered a latte I didn't really want, and tried to prepare myself for what felt like yet another strange turn in an already surreal situation. Marcus Okonkwo walked in exactly on time, and I recognized him immediately despite having no memory of our previous interaction. He was tall, probably in his late 40s, with close-cropped graying hair and kind eyes that seemed to carry the weight of experience. He spotted me and smiled, a genuine expression that reached his eyes. "Vanessa," he said, extending his hand. "Thank you for meeting me. I know this must seem strange." "Strange is relative at this point," I said, shaking his hand. "The last few weeks have redefined my understanding of the word." We sat down, and for a moment neither of us spoke. Then Marcus said quietly, "My brother stole from me. Not money exactly, though that was part of it. He stole my identity, my credit, my reputation. He opened accounts in my name, took out loans, destroyed my credit score. When I discovered it, I was 30 years old trying to buy my first home, and I found out I was $300,000 in debt for things I'd never purchased. I felt my chest tighten with recognition. What did you do?" "At first I protected him. He was my little brother and I couldn't imagine turning him into the authorities. I tried to handle it privately, to work with him to fix what he'd done. But he didn't see it as something that needed fixing. He felt entitled to my identity, to my resources, because I had a good job and financial stability while he was struggling. In his mind, he was just evening the scales." "That's almost exactly what Monica said to me," I whispered. "That I kept most of our parents' money. That I've always had everything while she had nothing. None of which is true, but she's convinced herself it is." Marcus nodded slowly. "The thing about family fraud is that it's never really about the money. It's about power, about resentment, about narratives we tell ourselves to justify our choices. My brother convinced himself I owed him my success because I'd had advantages he didn't. Your sister has convinced herself you owe her because of some perceived inequality that probably exists more in her imagination than in reality." "Did you prosecute him?" I asked, already knowing the answer from the sadness in his eyes. "Eventually, yes. But not before he destroyed another 2 years of my life, racking up more debt, stealing my mail to intercept credit card statements, forging my signature on documents. It was only when he tried to take out a mortgage in my name that I finally accepted that he would never stop unless I stopped him." He paused, stirring his coffee, though he hadn't added anything to it. "I reported him to the police. He was prosecuted, convicted, served 3 years in prison. And I've never spoken to him since." The finality of that statement hung between us. "Do you regret it?" I asked. "Not reporting him, no. That was the right thing to do, both for me and for society. People like my brother, like your sister, don't stop until they face real consequences. But I do regret that it had to come to that. I regret that he chose fraud over family, and that I couldn't save him from himself." We talked for over 2 hours, and it felt like therapy in a way my actual therapy sessions hadn't. Marcus understood the specific grief that comes with family betrayal, the way it destabilizes your understanding of your entire history. Had Monica always been capable of this? Had there been signs I'd missed? Or had desperation and resentment transformed her into someone unrecognizable? "You're going to spend a lot of time second-guessing yourself," Marcus said as we prepared to leave. "Wondering what you could have done differently, whether you somehow caused this by helping too much or not enough. But I want you to understand something crucial. Her choices are not your responsibility. You didn't make her create that fundraiser. You didn't force her to lie to hundreds of people. She made those decisions herself, and she alone bears the consequence of them." Before we parted ways, Marcus pulled out a business card. "This is my information. I run a consulting firm now, helping businesses with financial fraud prevention. But more importantly, I volunteer with a support group for people who've been victimized by family members. Financial abuse, identity theft, fraud. If you ever want to talk to people who truly understand what you're going through, we meet every other Thursday evening." I took the card, feeling something loosen in my chest. For weeks I'd felt completely alone, the only person who could possibly understand my situation. Now I knew there were others, people who'd walked this path before me and survived it. The legal process ground on slowly. Monica was formally charged with wire fraud and identity theft. Her lawyer continued to push the mental health narrative, arguing that she'd been traumatized by our parents' death and hadn't been thinking clearly. My lawyer Patricia was unmoved. Trauma doesn't give you the right to victimize others, she said firmly during one of our strategy sessions. And the level of planning that went into this, the elaborate false updates, the carefully chosen photos, that shows clear intent and ongoing decision-making. This wasn't a momentary lapse in judgment. As the case moved toward trial, I started attending Marcus's support group. The first meeting was terrifying. I sat in a circle with 8 strangers, all of whom had been betrayed by people they loved, and I was supposed to share my story out loud. When my turn came, my voice shook so badly I could barely get the words out. But everyone listened without judgment, nodding in recognition, offering quiet sounds of understanding and support. By the end of the meeting, I felt lighter than I had in months. I learned their stories too. There was Jennifer, whose mother had stolen her identity when she was 18 and ruined her credit before she even understood what credit was. There was Robert, whose business partner and best friend since childhood had embezzled $400,000 over 5 years. There was Keisha, whose husband had been running scams using her name and face while she thought he was working a normal sales job. Each story was different in its details but the same in its core. Someone they loved had chosen exploitation over honesty, and they were all working through the grief and anger and confusion that came with that realization. For months after I discovered Monica's fundraiser, the case went to trial. I sat in the courtroom listening to prosecutors detail her fraud, watching as evidence was presented. Bank records showing how she'd spent the donated money. Testimony from donors who'd given in good faith, believing they were helping a dying woman. My own statement, read aloud by the prosecutor, describing the moment I saw my face on that stranger's phone. Monica looked small sitting at the defense table. She'd lost weight, her clothes hanging loose on her frame. Part of me wanted to feel sorry for her. But then I remembered the woman at the grocery store. So moved by compassion that she donated money she probably couldn't afford to help a stranger. I remembered all the people who'd been tricked into giving their hard-earned money to a lie. And I remembered Monica's face when I'd confronted her, the way she tried to blame me, to make herself the victim in a story where she was clearly the predator. The jury deliberated for 6 hours. When they returned, the 4 women stood and announced their verdict. Guilty on all counts. Monica made a sound, something between a gasp and a sob. Her lawyer touched her arm, speaking to her in quiet tones I couldn't hear. The judge set a sentencing date for 3 weeks later and dismissed the court. I walked out of that courthouse into bright sunshine, feeling strange and unmoored. Justice had been served, but it didn't feel like victory. It felt like the closing of a door that could never be reopened. Patricia met me on the courthouse steps. "How are you feeling?" she asked. "I don't know," I admitted. "Empty, maybe? Like something that was taking up enormous space in my life suddenly vanished, and now I'm not sure what to do with the vacancy." "That's normal," she assured me. "You've been running on adrenaline and anger for months. Now that the crisis is over, you have to figure out who you are without it." The sentencing hearing was brief. Monica received 18 months in a minimum security facility, 3 years of probation, and was ordered to pay restitution to the defrauded donors. She didn't look at me when the sentence was read. I tried to feel something, relief or vindication or closure, but all I felt was tired. When I left the courtroom that day, I knew it was the last time I'd see my sister for a very long time, possibly forever. Life slowly returned to normal, or rather to a new version of normal that didn't include Monica. I threw myself into my work, built new friendships through the support group, started seeing a therapist who specialized in family trauma. Marcus became an unexpected friend, someone who understood without me having to explain, who could be there for the hard days when the grief of losing my sister hit me like a physical blow. 6 months after Monica's sentencing, Marcus called me with what he described as a business proposition. "My firm is expanding," he explained. "We're adding a new division focused on helping individuals recover from financial fraud, particularly family-related fraud. I need someone who understands both the business side and the personal side, someone who's been through it and came out the other side. I want you to consider coming to work with me." I was surprised by how appealing the offer sounded. "I don't have any experience in fraud prevention or financial consulting. You have something more valuable. Empathy, insight, and first-hand knowledge of how these schemes work and how they affect victims. I can teach you the technical skills. What I can't teach is what you already have." I thought about it for a week, talking it over with Lauren and my therapist and the people in my support group. The real estate market had been slow, and while I'd always enjoyed the work, something about Marcus's offer felt right in a way I couldn't quite articulate. I accepted the position and it changed everything. I worked with people who were going through exactly what I'd experienced, helping them navigate the legal system, rebuild their credit, process their trauma. I used my real estate knowledge to assist victims who'd had mortgages fraudulently taken out in their names. I helped develop workshops and resources for financial literacy and fraud prevention. For the first time in my adult life, I felt like I was doing work that mattered on a level beyond just earning a living. A year after Monica's conviction, I received a letter from her in prison. I stared at the envelope for 3 days before opening it, unsure if I was ready for whatever she wanted to say. When I finally read it, I found something I hadn't expected: a genuine apology. Not the manipulative, excuse-laden apologies I'd heard before, but a raw acknowledgement of what she'd done and the harm she'd caused. She wrote about the therapy she'd been required to attend, about confronting the resentment and entitlement she'd carried for so long. She didn't ask for forgiveness or reconciliation. She simply acknowledged the truth and took responsibility for her choices. I wrote back once, a short letter that said I appreciated her honesty and hoped she found peace. I didn't promise to visit or to rebuild our relationship. I couldn't do that, and I told her so as gently as I could. Some betrayals are too fundamental, too shattering, to ever fully recover from. But I also told her I didn't hate her, and that I hoped she would use this experience to become someone different, someone better. That was all I could offer, and it felt like enough. 2 years after discovering that fraudulent GoFundMe page, I stood in Marcus's office overlooking the city. We just finished a consultation with a new client, a woman whose daughter had stolen her retirement savings through a series of elaborate lies and forged documents. The woman had been devastated, unable to understand how her child could do such a thing. I'd held her hand while she cried and told her she wasn't alone, that there was a path forward even when it seemed impossible. "You were incredible with her," Marcus said after she left. "You gave her something I never could. The assurance that survival is possible." "We both survived," I pointed out. "That's true. But you've done more than survive. You've transformed your pain into purpose." I thought about that assessment. 2 years ago, I'd been standing in a grocery store parking lot. My entire understanding of family and trust shattered in an instant. Now I was helping others navigate similar betrayals, using my experience to ease their path through the darkness. "Can I ask you something?" I said to Marcus. "When you decided to report your brother, when you made the choice to prioritize truth over family loyalty, did you know it was the right decision? Or did you just have to trust that it would become right eventually?" He was quiet for a long moment. "I think sometimes the right decision and the hard decision are the same thing. I didn't know if I was doing the right thing. I just knew I couldn't keep enabling him, and that inaction was its own kind of choice. A choice that would have meant more victims, more damage, more lies." "That's how I felt," I admitted. "Like I couldn't not act, even though acting meant losing my sister forever." "You didn't lose her," Marcus said gently. "She lost herself, and in doing so, she lost you. That's not the same thing." We stood there in comfortable silence, watching the sun set over the city. Somewhere out there, Monica was finishing her sentence, preparing to re-enter a world that would be harder and less forgiving than the one she'd left. Somewhere out there, people were being betrayed by family members, discovering frauds, facing the impossible choice between justice and loyalty. And here, in this office, in this work, I'd found a way to transform my worst experience into something meaningful. I thought about the woman I'd been 2 years ago, exhausted and stressed but fundamentally trusting, believing that family was sacred and that love meant sacrifice. I thought about the woman I was now, scarred but stronger, clear-eyed about the reality that love could be weaponized and family could be a source of harm as much as support. I didn't regret who I'd become. I regretted the path that had brought me here, but I couldn't regret the destination. My phone buzzed with a text from Lauren. "Dinner tonight? I have news." I smiled, typing back a quick confirmation. Life went on. Friendships deepened. Work provided meaning. And slowly, carefully, I was building a version of myself that didn't require me to sacrifice my well-being for others' comfort. As I packed up my things and prepared to leave the office, I caught my reflection in the window. I looked tired, yes, but also content in a way I hadn't been in years. Not happy exactly, but settled. At peace with the choices I'd made and the consequences that had followed. The woman who'd started a GoFundMe claiming I was dying had tried to erase me, to replace my real life with a fictional tragedy that served her purposes. But I was still here, still standing, still moving forward. And that, I realized, was its own kind of victory. Not the triumphant ending I might have imagined in my younger, more naive days, but something more valuable, the quiet knowledge that I could survive betrayal, enforce boundaries, and still maintain my integrity. I walked out into the evening air, breathing deeply, grateful for the complexity and difficulty and ultimate rightness of the life I was building. Tomorrow there would be more clients to help, more stories to hear, more people struggling with the specific grief that comes from family betrayal. But tonight I would have dinner with my friend, share her news, and remember that beyond the pain and the legal battles and the fractured relationships, there was still life to be lived, joy to be found, and meaning to be made from even the hardest experiences. 3 years had passed since the trial, and I'd built something I never expected. A life defined by my own choices rather than others' needs. The consulting firm had expanded beyond what Marcus and I initially envisioned, and we now had a team of 12 people, all of whom had either experienced financial fraud personally or were passionate about helping victims recover. My role had evolved from consultant to director of victim services, and I spent my days developing programs, training staff, and meeting with clients whose stories echoed my own in heartbreaking ways. It was during one of these ordinary workdays that everything shifted again. I was reviewing a new case file when my assistant knocked on my door. "Vanessa, there's someone here to see you. He doesn't have an appointment, but he says it's important." His name is Dr. James Reeves. I didn't recognize the name, but something about the formality of the title combined with the unscheduled visit made me curious. "Send him in." The man who entered my office was probably in his mid-50s, with silver hair and wire-rimmed glasses that gave him a professorial air. He moved with a kind of careful precision, as if weighing each step, and when he extended his hand to shake mine, I noticed his fingers were ink-stained. "Miss Caldwell, thank you for seeing me without notice. I know your time is valuable." His voice was cultured, with a faint British accent that suggested education abroad. "Dr. Reeves, please sit down. What can I do for you?" He settled into the chair across from my desk, placing a leather portfolio on his lap but not opening it. "I'm not here as a client, precisely. I'm here because I saw you speak at a conference last month. The one on financial elder abuse." I remembered the conference. It had been in Seattle, a gathering of social workers, lawyers, and financial professionals focused on protecting vulnerable populations. I'd given a presentation about recognizing signs of family financial exploitation. I remember that conference, yes. "Did something in my presentation resonate with you?" He smiled, but it was tinged with sadness. "Everything in your presentation resonated with me. You see, I've spent the last 15 years studying family dynamics and financial abuse from an academic perspective. I'm a professor of psychology at Reed College, specializing in family systems theory. But your presentation made me realize I'd been approaching the subject entirely wrong." I leaned forward, intrigued despite myself. "How so?" Dr. Reeves opened his portfolio and pulled out a worn photograph, sliding it across my desk. It showed a younger version of him standing beside a woman with kind eyes and a bright smile. Between them was a teenage girl with the same smile. "That's my daughter, Emma. She died 8 years ago from a drug overdose. She was 23 years old." The grief in his voice was palpable, even after all those years. "I'm so sorry for your loss." He nodded, accepting my condolence. "Emma struggled with addiction from the time she was 16. My wife and I tried everything. Rehab programs, therapy, medication-assisted treatment, tough love, unconditional support. Nothing worked for more than a few months. And throughout those 7 years, Emma stole from us repeatedly. She forged checks, used our credit cards, pawned family heirlooms, even took out loans in my name." The familiar story settled over me like a heavy coat. "What did you do?" I asked, though I suspected I knew the answer. "We enabled her," he said simply. "Every single time. We told ourselves it was compassion, that she was sick and needed our help, that family doesn't give up on family. We paid off her debts, covered her rent, bailed her out literally and figuratively over and over again. My wife and I nearly divorced over it. She wanted to stop helping, to let Emma face consequences. I couldn't bear the thought of my daughter homeless or in jail. He paused, his hands trembling slightly as he closed the portfolio. The night Emma died, she called me asking for money. Said she needed it for a security deposit on a sober living facility. I knew she was lying. I'd heard that particular lie a dozen times before. But I sent her $500 anyway because I couldn't stand the thought of saying no to my daughter. She used that money to buy the drugs that killed her. The silence in my office was profound. Dr. Reeves, addiction is a disease. You didn't cause your daughter's death. Didn't I? His eyes met mine, raw with pain. I spent years researching family enabling, understanding intellectually how providing resources without boundaries can actually perpetuate harmful behavior. I wrote papers about it, taught classes about it. And yet when it was my own daughter, I couldn't apply any of that knowledge. I loved her too much to set the boundaries she needed. Why are you telling me this? I asked gently. He pulled out another document from his portfolio, this one a printed article. I recognized it immediately as a profile piece about me that had run in a local magazine 6 months ago. Because when I listened to you speak about your sister, about the decision to prosecute despite the personal cost, I realized something. You did what I couldn't. You loved someone enough to let them face the consequences of their actions, even when it destroyed your relationship with them. That's not cruelty. That's the hardest kind of love there is. I felt my throat tighten. It didn't feel like love at the time. It felt like survival. Perhaps they're not mutually exclusive, he suggested. Miss Caldwell, I've spent the last 8 years since Emma's death researching family financial exploitation from every angle. Psychological, sociological, legal, economic. I've interviewed hundreds of victims and perpetrators. I've analyzed patterns and outcomes. And I've written a book. He pulled out a manuscript easily 400 pages thick. This is 15 years of research, but it's missing something crucial. It's missing the voice of someone who's lived it, who's made the impossible choices and survived them. It's academic and thorough, but it's not human. Not the way your story is human. I stared at the manuscript, understanding dawning. You want me to contribute to your book. I want you to co-author it with me, he corrected. I have the research and the theoretical framework. You have the lived experience and the practical insight. Together, we could create something that actually helps people, both the victims trying to set boundaries and the professionals trying to support them. The proposal was so unexpected I didn't know how to respond. Dr. Reeves, I'm not a writer. I'm not an academic. I don't have any credentials that would give me authority in that space. You have the most important credential: authenticity. You've walked through the fire and come out the other side. Do you know how rare that is? Most people either remain enmeshed with their abuser, or they break away but never process what happened. You've done both. You've set boundaries and pursued justice, but you've also done the internal work to understand the dynamics that made you vulnerable in the first place. He wasn't wrong. The therapy, the support groups, the work I'd been doing with other victims had forced me to examine every aspect of my relationship with Monica. I'd had to confront uncomfortable truths about my own patterns, the way I'd equated love with sacrifice, how I'd needed to be needed, the subtle ways I'd enabled Monica's dependence even as I resented it. I need to think about this, I said finally. It's a significant commitment, and I'm not sure I'm ready to revisit everything in the detail a book would require. Dr. Reeves stood, leaving the manuscript on my desk. Of course. Take all the time you need. My contact information is on the title page. If you decide you're interested, or even if you just want to talk about it further, please reach out. After he left, I sat staring at the manuscript for a long time. The title page read Loving Harm: Understanding and Recovering from Family Financial Exploitation by Dr. James Reeves. There was space below his name, waiting for a co-author to be added. That evening I met Marcus for our weekly dinner. It had become a ritual over the past 2 years. A standing date where we decompress from the week's cases and remind each other why we did this difficult work. I told him about Dr. Reeves's visit and his proposal. Marcus listened carefully, his expression thoughtful. What's making you hesitate? He asked when I'd finished explaining. I don't know if I want to put myself out there like that. The trial was public and the media coverage was invasive enough. A book would mean going even deeper, being even more vulnerable. What if I can't do it? What if I try to write about Monica and I just fall apart? Marcus set down his fork, giving me his full attention. You know what I learned in therapy after everything with my brother? The things we're most afraid to examine are usually the things we most need to process. You've done incredible work helping others, Vanessa. Maybe it's time to help yourself by telling your story completely. I've told my story, I protested. In support groups, in consultations, in that conference presentation. You've told versions of your story, he corrected gently. The parts that are relevant to helping others. But have you ever told it for yourself? Have you ever put down on paper everything you felt, everything you learned, everything you wish you'd known before it happened? I hadn't. I'd compartmentalized, focusing on the practical aspects while keeping the deeper emotional truths locked away where they couldn't overwhelm me. It sounds exhausting, I admitted. It probably will be, Marcus agreed. It was for me when I finally wrote down everything about my brother. But it was also liberating. There's something about seeing your experience in black and white, organized into a narrative with a beginning, middle, and end. It gives you power over it instead of letting it have power over you. I thought about that as I drove home later that night. Power over my story instead of letting it have power over me. The idea was appealing even if the execution seemed daunting. I spent the weekend reading Dr. Reeves's manuscript. It was comprehensive and well-researched, full of case studies and statistical analysis. But Marcus had been right when he said it lacked something. It was clinical, observational. It examined family financial exploitation the way a scientist might examine a specimen under a microscope, with precision but without feeling. The victims in his case studies were anonymous, their pain reduced to bullet points and percentages. Monday morning I called the number on the title page. Dr. Reeves answered on the second ring. Miss Caldwell, I'm glad to hear from you. I read your manuscript, I told him. It's good. Thorough, well-argued, important. But you're right that it's missing something. It's missing the mess of it. The way it feels to love someone who's hurting you. The guilt and the anger and the confusion all tangled up together. The way you can know intellectually that you need to set boundaries while emotionally feeling like you're abandoning someone who needs you. Yes, he said softly. Exactly that. So will you help me at it? I took a deep breath. I'll try. But I need you to understand something up front. I'm not interested in writing a revenge narrative or painting myself as a perfect victim. What happened with Monica was complicated. I made mistakes too. I enabled her for years before the GoFundMe incident. I'm only interested in doing this if we can tell the truth, even when it's uncomfortable. That's precisely what I want, Dr. Reeves assured me. Complexity, nuance, truth. The simple narratives about evil abusers and innocent victims don't help anyone. Real life is messier than that. We agreed to meet twice a week to work on the book. Dr. Reeves would maintain the research and theoretical framework, while I would add personal narrative, practical guidance, and emotional depth. We'd collaborate on case studies, drawing from both his academic research and my work with clients, always with permission and always anonymized. The first writing session was harder than I'd anticipated. Dr. Reeves had sent me a chapter about recognizing warning signs of family financial exploitation, and my task was to add personal examples and emotional context. I sat in front of my laptop for 2 hours typing and deleting, unable to find the right words. Finally, I called Marcus. I can't do this, I told him. Every time I try to write about Monica, I just freeze up. It feels like picking at a wound that's finally healed. Maybe it hasn't healed as much as you think, he suggested. Maybe this is part of the healing process. He was right, though I didn't want to admit it. That night, instead of trying to write for the book, I just wrote for myself. I wrote about the first time Monica had asked me for money, how proud I'd felt that my little sister trusted me to help her. I wrote about the gradual escalation, the way her requests became more frequent and more urgent. I wrote about the knot of resentment that had grown in my stomach, even as I kept writing checks, kept making excuses for her, kept believing that this time would be different. I wrote until 3 in the morning, until my eyes burned and my hands ached. When I finally stopped, I had 20 pages of raw, unedited memory and emotion. It wasn't pretty or polished, but it was true. The next day, I sent it to Dr. Reeves with a note. This is too messy for the book, but maybe it helps you understand what I'm trying to say. He called me within an hour. Vanessa, this is perfect. This is exactly what the book needs. Not cleaned up or polished, but real. Do you trust me to edit this into something readable, while maintaining your voice? I hesitated. Letting someone else shape my story felt vulnerable in a way I wasn't prepared for. But I also knew I couldn't do this alone. Yes, I said finally. I trust you. Over the next 6 months we fell into a rhythm. I would write, usually late at night when my defenses were down and the truth came easier. Dr. Reeves would take my raw writing and weave it into his more academic prose, creating chapters that balanced research with lived experience. We'd meet weekly to review the work, and I'd tell him when something felt false or sanitized, when the academic language had stripped away the emotional truth. The process was exhausting and cathartic in equal measure. There were days when I'd finish a writing session and have to call my therapist for an emergency appointment because I'd unearthed something I wasn't ready to face. There were nights when I'd dream about Monica, wake up crying, and have to remind myself that I'd made the right choice even though it still hurt. But there were also moments of unexpected clarity. Writing about the progression of Monica's exploitation helped me see patterns I'd missed while living through it. The way she'd always approached me when I was tired or stressed, when my defenses were low. The way she'd frame her requests as temporary loans even though we both knew she'd never pay them back. The way she'd alternate between flattery and guilt, telling me I was the best sister in the world one moment and accusing me of not caring about family the next. I also had to confront my own role in the dynamic. The way I derived identity and purpose from being the reliable one, the savior, the person who could fix things. The way I'd unconsciously needed Monica to be dependent because it gave me a sense of importance. That realization was perhaps the hardest thing I'd written. I enabled my sister's exploitation not just because I loved her, but because being needed made me feel valuable. I confused sacrifice with love, and in doing so I hurt both of us. Dr. Reeves read that section with tears in his eyes. That's exactly what I did with Emma, he said quietly. I told myself I was helping her out of love, but really I was helping her because I couldn't bear to feel like I'd failed as a father. Her addiction wasn't about me, but I made it about me anyway. We sat in silence for a while after that, two people who'd loved their family members wrong, trying to make meaning from the wreckage. As the book took shape, something unexpected happened. I started to forgive myself. Not for prosecuting Monica, that I'd never regretted, but for all the years before, for the enabling and the resentment and the unexamined patterns. I'd done the best I could with the understanding I had at the time. I'd made mistakes, but I'd also been trapped in a dynamic that was bigger than my individual choices. One evening, Dr. Reeves brought a bottle of wine to our working session. "We've finished the first draft," he announced. 473 pages of research, narrative, and hard-won wisdom. I think we should celebrate. We toasted to the manuscript, to the work we'd done, to the healing that had happened alongside the writing. "What happens now?" I asked. "Now we find a publisher. And Vanessa, I think this book could really help people. Not just victims of family financial exploitation, but anyone struggling with the question of when love requires boundaries, and when boundaries are an act of love." The publishing process took another year. We found an agent who believed in the project, then a publisher who wanted to bring it to a wider audience. There were more revisions, more rounds of editing, more opportunities to refine and deepen the work. Throughout it all, I continued my day job at the consulting firm, continued facilitating support groups, continued living my life. But the book had become a kind of anchor, a project that gave structure and meaning to everything I'd been through. During this time, I got another letter from Monica. She'd been released from prison 6 months earlier and was living in a halfway house, working as a waitress while trying to rebuild her life. The letter was different from her previous one. Less focused on apology, more focused on accountability. She wrote about the cognitive behavioral therapy she'd done in prison, about recognizing her patterns of entitlement and blame shifting. She wrote about how hard it was to live in the real world without being able to fall back on family money or manipulation. "I understand why you can't have me in your life," she wrote. "I understand that I destroyed something irreplaceable, and that understanding has its own apology. But I want you to know that I'm trying to become someone different. Someone who earns what she has. Someone who takes responsibility for her choices. I don't expect forgiveness, but I hope someday you can think of me without pain. I showed the letter to Dr. Reeves during one of our sessions. How do you feel about it? He asked. Sad, I said after a moment. Sad that it took prison and losing everything for her to start doing this work. Sad that we can't have a relationship even though she's finally becoming someone I might actually want a relationship with. Sad that some things, once broken, can't be fixed no matter how much both people want to fix them. Do you want to respond? I thought about it carefully. No. I think the kindest thing I can do for both of us is let her move forward without me. She needs to build a life that isn't dependent on my approval or my resources. And I need to maintain the boundaries that protect my peace. Dr. Reeves nodded. That's growth, you know. Being able to hold compassion for someone, while also maintaining firm boundaries. Most people think it has to be one or the other. Either you forgive and reconcile or you cut someone off completely and hate them forever. But you've found a third way. The book was published on a rainy Tuesday in October, 4 years after the GoFundMe incident that had shattered my life. Dr. Reeves and I did a joint book tour, speaking at universities and conferences and support groups. We told our stories, answered questions, signed copies for people who saw themselves in our experiences. The response was overwhelming. We heard from people all over the country who'd been financially exploited by family members. Adult children stolen from by their elderly parents, parents drained dry by adult children, siblings who'd forged documents and destroyed credit. Each story was unique, but the underlying dynamics were hauntingly similar. The need to be needed, the confusion of love with sacrifice, the way family ties could be weaponized by people who understood exactly which buttons to push. At one event in Chicago, a woman in her 70s approached me during the signing. My daughter stole my retirement savings, she said quietly. Over $200,000 gone. My friends tell me I should prosecute, but I can't imagine sending my own child to prison. How did you do it? How did you find the strength? I took her hand, feeling the tremor in her fingers. I stopped thinking about it as sending her to prison and started thinking about it as refusing to participate in her self-destruction. By holding her accountable, I gave her the opportunity to face reality and change. Would she take that opportunity? That was up to her. But staying silent would have been telling her that what she did was acceptable, and that would have guaranteed she'd do it again. The woman's eyes filled with tears. I never thought about it that way. Most people don't, I said gently. We're taught that family loyalty means protecting each other from consequences. But real love sometimes means letting people face the natural results of their choices, even when it breaks your heart to do it. After she left, Dr. Reeves came over to where I was sitting. You were right about what this book needed, he said. All the research in the world couldn't have given that woman what you just did. Permission to protect herself while still loving her daughter. The book became somewhat successful, not a bestseller but a steady seller, especially in therapeutic and legal circles. It was assigned in social work programs and psychology courses. Lawyers used it to help clients understand the emotional complexity of prosecuting family members. Therapists recommended it to clients struggling with boundary setting. And victims found it, read it, and saw themselves reflected in a way that made them feel less alone. 6 months after publication, I received an email that changed everything again. It was from a television producer who'd read the book and wanted to discuss adapting it into a documentary series about family financial exploitation. Would I be willing to be interviewed to share my story on camera, to potentially help them find other families willing to participate? My first instinct was to say no. I'd shared enough, exposed enough, made myself vulnerable enough. But then I thought about the woman in Chicago, about the hundreds of people who'd reached out after reading the book, about how powerful it had been to see my experience validated and explained. Maybe there was value in reaching an even wider audience. I called Marcus to talk it through. What's your gut telling you? He asked. My gut is terrified, I admitted. But my head says this could help people who would never pick up a book about family financial exploitation. People who are living through it right now, and don't even have the language to describe what's happening to them. Then you know what you need to do. The documentary took 8 months to produce. They interviewed me extensively, filmed me at work at the consulting firm, captured support group meetings with participants' permission. They also interviewed Dr. Reeves, Patricia Chun, even some of the people who'd been defrauded by Monica's GoFundMe campaign. They found other families willing to share their stories. A son who'd emptied his mother's bank account to support a gambling addiction. A father who'd stolen his daughter's identity to hide his own financial failure. Siblings who'd fought over inheritance with tactics that bordered on criminal. What emerged was a nuanced portrait of how family dynamics, economic pressure, and psychological patterns combined to create situations where people who genuinely loved each other could also genuinely harm each other. The documentary didn't paint simple villains and victims. It showed complexity, showed how family financial exploitation often developed gradually, showed how both perpetrators and victims were trapped in cycles they didn't fully understand. When the documentary aired, the response was immediate and intense. The production company's website crashed from traffic. Social media exploded with people sharing their own stories. News outlets picked up the story, leading to more interviews, more exposure, more vulnerability than I'd ever intended. But something else happened too. The conversation changed. People started talking openly about family financial abuse in a way they hadn't before. Support groups formed. Laws were proposed to better protect elderly victims. Financial institutions began training staff to recognize signs of exploitation. The documentary had sparked something larger than my individual story, a cultural reckoning with the uncomfortable truth that families could be sources of harm as well as love. Through all of this, I kept working at the consulting firm, kept facilitating support groups, kept living my life. But something had shifted. I was no longer just a victim who'd survived, or even an advocate helping others. I'd become a voice in a larger movement, someone whose story had transcended the personal to become part of a broader conversation about family, loyalty, and the courage it takes to set boundaries. 5 years after discovering that GoFundMe page, I received an invitation to speak at a conference on elder financial abuse. The keynote speaker was a senator who drafted legislation to strengthen protections for vulnerable adults. During the lunch break, she sought me out. "Ms. Caldwell, your work has been instrumental in bringing this issue to light. The documentary, the book, your testimony before our committee last year, all of it has helped build momentum for real change. I wanted to thank you personally." I shook her hand, feeling the surreal quality of the moment. 5 years ago, I'd been standing in a grocery store parking lot, my world crumbling around me. Now I was being thanked by a senator for helping change policy. "I just told my story," I said. "You did more than that. You gave voice to thousands of people who'd been suffering in silence, who thought they were alone in their experience. That's powerful, Ms. Caldwell. Never underestimate how powerful that is." That evening, I sat in my apartment looking out at the city lights. My phone buzzed with a text from Marcus. "Saw you on the news at the conference. Proud of you." Another text came through, this one from Dr. Reeves. "The publisher wants to discuss a second edition with updated research and new case studies. Are you interested?" I thought about Monica, probably still working her waitress job, still trying to build a life from the ashes of her choices. I thought about all the people I'd met over the years who were struggling with similar situations, trying to love family members who hurt them, trying to set boundaries while fighting against everything they'd been taught about loyalty and forgiveness. I thought about the version of myself who'd enabled and sacrificed and confused martyrdom with love, and the version of myself I'd become. Scarred but whole, boundaried but compassionate, clear-eyed about the cost of both connection and separation. The truth was that surviving Monica's betrayal hadn't made me harder or colder. If anything, it had made me more empathetic, more understanding of how complex human relationships could be. I'd learned that you could hold multiple truths simultaneously, that someone could be both victim and enabler, that love could coexist with the need for distance, that forgiveness didn't require reconciliation, that healing didn't mean forgetting. I texted Dr. Reeves back. "Yes, let's do a second edition. I have more to say." Because I did. I had 5 more years of experience, hundreds more client stories, deeper understanding of the patterns and dynamics that created these situations. I had insight into recovery that could only come from living it, from building a life on the other side of betrayal. The work continued as it always would. There would always be more families trapped in harmful dynamics, more people struggling to understand when love required boundaries, and when boundaries were an act of love. There would always be a need for voices like mine, voices that said you can survive this, You can choose yourself without being selfish. You can love someone from a distance when proximity would destroy you. As I prepared for bed that night, I thought about the woman I'd been at 41, discovering my sister's fraud with shaking hands and a breaking heart. If I could go back and tell her anything, what would it be? Maybe this. The betrayal you're experiencing isn't the end of your story. It's a painful chapter, but it's not the whole book. You will survive this. More than survive, you will transform this pain into purpose, this breaking into building, this ending into a new beginning. You will learn that protecting yourself isn't selfish, that boundaries aren't cruel, that choosing your own well-being over someone else's comfort is not only acceptable, but sometimes necessary. You will discover that you are more resilient than you knew, more capable than you imagined, more deserving of love and respect than you ever believed. The road ahead is hard, but you can walk it. And on the other side of this darkness, there is light, meaningful work, genuine connection, and the quiet peace that comes from living in alignment with your values, rather than in service to others' expectations. That's what I would tell her. And as I drifted off to sleep, I hoped that somewhere, someone who needed to hear those words was finding them, was beginning to believe that survival and even thriving were possible. Because they were. I was living proof. 10 years after that ordinary Tuesday in the grocery store, I stood in the lobby of our newest office, watching the dedication ceremony unfold. The Reeves Caldwell Foundation for Family Financial Recovery had grown beyond anything Marcus and I had dreamed possible. 15 locations across the country, a 24-hour hotline, legal aid services, and partnerships with law enforcement agencies nationwide. Dr. Reeves stood beside me, older now but still passionate about the work. His wife had joined our board of directors, channeling her own grief about Emma into helping other families before tragedy struck. "Never imagined this," he said quietly, gesturing at the crowd of donors, volunteers, and grateful clients filling the space. "Neither did I admitted. The foundation bore both our names now, a recognition that our combined perspectives, academic and lived experience, created something more powerful than either could alone." A young woman approached us nervously. "Miss Caldwell? I wanted to thank you. I saw the documentary 3 years ago when my brother was stealing from our mother. Your story gave me the courage to intervene. We got her into a protected financial arrangement and my brother into treatment. Our family isn't perfect, but we're all still here. Still trying." These moments never got old. Each person who found their voice, who set boundaries, who chose difficult love over easy enabling, they were why I kept doing this work even when it exhausted me. That evening, I returned to my quiet apartment and found an email waiting. The sender's name made my breath catch. Monica Caldwell. I hadn't heard from her in 5 years, not since I'd chosen not to respond to her last letter. My finger hovered over the delete button, but curiosity won. The email was brief. "Vanessa, I saw the foundation announcement online. I'm proud of what you've built from the worst thing I ever did. I'm not asking for anything. I just wanted you to know I've been sober and employed for 6 years now. I volunteer at a women's shelter, helping them spot financial abuse patterns. I use our story, with your permission implied through your public work, to help others avoid becoming what I was. I hope you're happy. You deserve to be. Monica." I read it 3 times, feeling something shift in my chest. Not forgiveness exactly, and certainly not reconciliation, but perhaps acceptance. Monica had found her own path to meaning, her own way of transforming harm into help. We'd never be sisters again, not in any traditional sense, but maybe we were both finally free. I closed the laptop and looked around my home, filled with books, photographs of friends, mementos from speaking engagements. A life built on my own terms, defined by my choices rather than others' needs. It was enough. More than enough. It was everything I'd never known I could have. And it all started the day I finally chose myself. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out.